Dr. Jen Peerich, welcome to the Dark Night of the Soul Unwrapped.
It is a real honor and a pleasure to be with you, Fiona. I am such a fan of your beingness, your work, your essence in the world is medicine for us all. I'm so glad to be here.
Thank you. You too. I mean, you're such a presence in my life. I was just thinking this morning, it's about 7 years since I got in touch with you. I think I'd just seen a few things that you'd written on Facebook and asked you to write the foreword to the Dark Night of the Soul book. And here we are 7 years later. I thought it would be great to start really at the beginning of your dark night. What was happening in your life around the time your dark night began?
So my dark night happened in the summer of 2011. So that's 14 years ago. And it was a culmination of a long period of, well, a lifetime of a lot of internal suffering in my mind, the trauma I had experienced in my life. I didn't have the tools to, in a lot of meaningful ways, deal with it. And I found myself smack dab in the face of true love with a huge bag of unresolved trauma. and it was with my wife Iris, who loved me so purely, in a way I didn't love myself. And that unresolved baggage brought me to a point where I was sabotaging the best thing that had ever happened to me, and I knew it. And I knew it. I knew that if I didn't deal with myself really, and I didn't know how that would happen, but I just knew that I would lose this best thing, this best person. And so it was after a big fight, I went into my backyard and just collapsed on every level. I really was at the edge of my life because I didn't want to keep living that way, but I also didn't have a way out of living that way. And trees have always been throughout my life a through line of safety and presence. I didn't understand that at the time, but I felt that, knew that as a child. And then during this summer, again, trees came forward as soul friends. Anamkara, my trees were the ones who came forward in my dark night and reached out to me and gave me a lifeline of presence through a very painful and difficult summer of just kind of losing my mind, in the best way,
Yeah.
most awful way, but also the best way. It was the death of identities, stories, really doing a deep inventory of, and this wasn't something I was trying to do. It was something that was just kind of, it had been building and building inside of me for so long that it was just coming to the fore for me to finally look at and work with. But it was devastating. I stopped brushing my teeth. I stopped communicating to people. I stopped taking care of myself in a meaningful way. And my entire soul focus became, how do I find a way to live inside myself? Where is there, I know that there are people who are happy in this world. I see that. Why can't I have that? Why does my mind hurt me so bad? Why can't I stop hurting myself? All these questions came to the fore, and my backyard kind of turned into this kind of very sacred place where I was doing all of that excavation. And And finally, over the summer, I was doing a lot of self-inquiry, like coming into an awareness of my mind that I didn't have before. I was able to finally see my thoughts rather than my thoughts feeling like they were possessing me, controlling me. I was on the right side of my thoughts through that summer. And when I got to the end of that summer and I had really I really inhabited my beingness, the fullness of what it is to be me. I looked up one day at the trees, the riser and the diver is what I named them, and I said, you see how hard I've worked. I come out here every day and I give it. If there's anything keeping me from living the life that I deserve, take it from me, because I don't want it. I don't want it anymore. And it wasn't that day, but it was in the following weeks that I came back out of that very dark night, a profoundly changed human being, but yet, paradoxically, no different at all. Just me, aware of myself. And then that dark night spawned, um, 14 years of trying to understand it. Like, I didn't have a conceptual framework to understand what had happened to me. I knew I was different. I knew I was still having all the same thoughts, but they didn't hurt me like they did before. I just was aware of them. And so the last 14 years, I've been on this journey of really trying to unpack it, uh, trying to understand it for many reasons, for my own reasons, but also because I'm very sensitive, and I know you are too, Fiona, in the awareness of how much suffering is out there, mental suffering is out there, and how much we need practical tools, sane, sober, practical tools for navigating these times in our life that are so painful. And so I'm so grateful for your work because you are providing that framework that so many of us need when we go through that kind of an experience.
Thank you. There's so many threads to tease out here. I was struck by what you just said about having gone through all of that, utterly changed and yet paradoxically you. And I think prior to my dark night, I'd always imagined that some kind of transformation, which is what I wanted, I was going towards sorts of therapy and exploring spiritually. I imagined that transformation would be changing from this into something else much more desirable. And yet, as you just beautifully described, that is absolutely not what happens. That in that undoing, in that taking apart in the backyard with the trees, you were coming more and more into you, but coming into relationship with yourself, like you were saying, with your thoughts and I'm guessing with everything else inside in a completely different way than you'd ever experienced before. Having had these last 14 years and unpacking this, and I can totally relate to that. It's the same for me. What's your understanding now of what was going on in that summer?
Great question. So as I track the through line to from here to that breakdown and dark night to the roots, um, what's clear to me is that I have been on a long journey of tending to wounds that happened when I was very young. I had cancer as a baby, and um, that those treatments and that experience, and then I was also in a home with very complex trauma. Um, those were the seeds of pain and the wounds that were established in me very young. And a lot of my early life and childhood, adolescence, and young adulthood was wrapped in those experiences in a very painful way. I was just kind of reacting to one trauma to the next without a lot of spaciousness and awareness of any of it, just kind of moving from one painful thing to the next and whatever I thought was the next right thing to be. But that unfortunately started to culminate and become a snowball that wasn't getting resolved. And so I was moving from one painful relationship to the next, from one bad experience, impulsive decision to the next. And so by the time I met Iris and really was face to face with real love and seeing myself in a way that I had never seen myself before, that snowball was so big that it almost couldn't not have ended up in that. You know what I mean? It seems kind of inevitable. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, that's so powerful, isn't it? To be faced with a pure love as you were with Iris, that snowball simply had to implode, it seems to me. I mean, it couldn't it couldn't withstand the force of her love.
Truth. It was a snowball of illusions, and that snowball of illusions has no power in the face of truth. Yeah.
I mean, what an incredible gift to meet somebody with the capacity to love you in that way. I mean, I'm so deeply glad that that is what happened, and how unbelievably painful in that summer to be faced with that whole snowball. I mean, everything you described. I'm struck by what you said as well about tending to the wounds. You know, I think often when people talk about tending to childhood wounds, they're talking psychologically, and of course those are important and huge woundings. For you, it was literal physical woundings too, right? I mean, as you said, from having cancer and treatment for cancer at not even a year old. What's your sense of how those woundings have interwoven or meshed or
So the beautiful thing that I have discovered, well, first of all, let me say that I experience and feel and believe that we are many parts. That I'm just teeming full of parts and selves and identities. And a lot of what's happening in the Dark Night experience is a breaking down of selves and parts and a coming forth of new parts and selves. And so, with that framing, what happened to me when I was a baby, and that I see now in the retrospect, is that just the sheer physical pain, not just to mention the emotional pain, but just the sheer physical pain of being radiated, of being cut, of being strapped down as a baby, brought forward one of the greatest loves of my life. In that pain, there were a lot of periods of time where I wasn't able to be touched as a baby because of treatments. And so what was born in me in those most painful points of not being alone as a baby, being physically, hurt, is a part of me that was born out of protection and protecting myself. At the core of what it is to be Jen, there is a protective self in me that was born out of sheer survival. And that beautiful protective self grew with me, lived alongside me, uh had feelings about what I was going through even. But I was not, because I was not in any conscious relationship with my own mind or self, I was not most of my life able to identify that protective self part, um, or name it or really be aware of it, just that I knew that I had a very strong survival, often hypervigilant nature. That would in any I mean, I'm the one looking for the exit of the doors in any room I go in. I'm the one who can tell you if a change in the sound of the room, very subtle, happens. I know I'm tuned in on all levels. Well, there is that beautiful part of me that was born when I was forced into a very painful situation as a baby. That protective part was born and has lived with me. Now, when I had that, what's interesting is when I had that dark night in 2011, that experience set the stage for me to be able to then start to recognize and engage with those parts, because before then my mind was so loud and I was attaching to every thought. I had no ability to really kind of be in a healthy conscious relationship with myself. But suddenly that I opened up during that dark night, those selves that were coming to the fore that had been with me all along were much more obvious to me. um I went on after that, about 7 years later, to graduate school where I started doing autoethnography, and that's researching your own self. Your own self is a field of research. And even then, in deep research, I called that pattern an addiction distress. I was so close, so close. And then I finished graduate school and I went on and then I started the creative work of trying to understand this part. And I started writing my memoir, and this hypervigilant part really demanded to be named and seen, and not just named and seen, but be a co-narrator in my memoir.
Fantastic.
So this part that has been inside of me, her name is Ruth. Ruthless protection. She's a dog. She is everything you would want in a protector and guardian for a baby who can't be touched, who needs that kind of protection. I can't think of a more perfect guardian than a dog energy. But you see, it took me all these years of looking at my life from a variety of different ways through studying it, researching it, looking at it, and creatively approaching it all these ways. Now I see, oh, Ruth, rest here with me, you hypervigilant protector. Ruth, thank you for loving me and protecting me and being my vigilant intelligentsia that is so very strong. So, yeah, that was a roundabout way to answering what has been happening with me is that my parts have been coming to the fore in different ways for me to then and important to note that the parts are not trying to save, they're not saviors. Right? In the way that the
Right.
Anamara are not saviors, they're companions. If you happen to have a part inside of you, like I have a protective part of Ruth as a dog, Ruth has never tried to save me, protect me, but I think it's important to note that we all have our own will and that these parts arise for me as companions in the way you so beautifully outline in the book. And so I just want to, throw out there that maybe also in the Dark Knight, our companions in Anamgara come also in inner parts and also trans species parts, owls, turtles. Who knows all the parts that you're going to meet in your Dark Knight?
Fantastic. I mean, one of the things that I love, and many things I love about all of this, but one of them in particular is, and I totally get why it would take a long time to get to this point. But as you were saying, even when you were doing your doctorate, you were still thinking of it as an addiction to stress. And I think we're so enculturated into basically pathologizing ourselves. Isn't it? Seeing. I mean, I've absolutely done it myself. Seeing these parts as things to be healed, or you know, inner children to be healed or settled or integrated, and all of those things. And it isn't that I don't think some integration might happen along the way, but I think fundamentally what we're describing is a coming into relationship with these parts entirely on their own terms, as happened with Ruth, being able to say, this is what I am, it sounds like she was saying, and would not be accepted on any other than her own terms. And I think one of the things that's a real shift for most of us in the Dark Knight, or I think for all of us in the Dark Knight, is to start to not only acknowledge but start to relate to our inner parts, such as they are, prompted by them, rather than coming at them with some sort of schema or plan or idea of what we think we should be doing with them. And that, I think, in my experience, includes all the parts of our young selves, or as you saying, trans-species parts that are ancestral in some way, or even our body, or parts of our body, or these parts can be a multiplicity of things, to use your word I love. So I think to then reconnect with a part like Ruth or these other parts purely in their own terms gives us a very different sense of ourselves, I think. I think there's far less of a sense of brokenness or needing to fix, and much more I mean, the word enthralled comes, that not only can we explore with curiosity, but there's as you said, this is a profoundly important relationship in your life.
Yes. Yes. I mean, if you think about it, how could Ruth have felt safe coming to the fore in a research environment, right? If you were
Yeah.
a art that had been hurt and, not used to the light and you would maybe want to introduce yourself but feel scared, why would you come out to a place that's going to dissect you and call you pathological names and want to fix you? uh Say you're bad, you're wrong. It really wasn't until I opened up creatively that Ruth was finally felt safe enough to be named, played with, forwarded. And yes, how beautiful that we have these parts with, I mean, that's great one of the great things she's done in this book is say to the reader, what part of you is in your home that isn't being fed? What part of you is wandering the hallways in the dark because no one's come home. You know, I mean, the dog archetype is so powerful because there's a requirement for care there. And Ruth's voice is so powerful because that dog is coming forward and saying, I wasn't mad at you for not being there. I knew you couldn't be there, but I waited for you. I waited. Man, to take that and realize that that is post pathology.
What a great phrase. Post pathology. In a different way, in a different form, because mine isn't a dog. But I really relate to that, to what you say about the part that was just willing to wait, that knew that I couldn't do it any sooner than I did it. It didn't matter how much I would have berated myself or gone to yet more therapy or whatever, but was sitting waiting for me to be able to be ready to drop all of that, stop all the running around, and just come back home. And I love that question. Just to say, we'll connect with your book in the show notes. We'll include a link to your book in the show notes. What part of you is waiting there? I mean, that's such a beautiful question. And I think until we start to have these experiences, it's really difficult to feel into them because they sound like something that we're imagining ahead of time, right? And that isn't my experience at all. They come into view. It isn't that we're somehow creating them or bringing them into existence through imagining. They are there and being seen and discovered and related to in all the ways that we're describing, in ways that I think we would never have guessed at prior to experiencing that.
Yes, one of the most powerful healing trajectories of my life is recognizing what's called, just to be clinical and technical, the single self assumption. And that is that we are one self. It is prominent. It is the norm. It is, you go through the world and you're pretty well expected to not be a changing being, to not have, the flexibility to adapt and grow. That's really baked in, that assumption, into our world and how we communicate even about ourselves. And so the recognition that I am many selves, and I always knew that. My mom was a particular type of person that was very dualistic and binary. It's either right or wrong, black and white. You are what you are. Zebra stripes never change, that kind of vibe. But I knew, even when I heard that as a young person, that that was not true, and that I had a tremendous capacity for expressing myself, that I could, flow in and out of parts of me. That felt very intuitive to me as a child. But as we get older, that kind of gets shut down and we become more static in our sense of selves. And that, I think, creates its own kind of painful trajectory because we get settled into a particular way of being and knowing ourselves. I did, certainly, that was very painful. And so the recognition that we have many selves, and of course, there's a lot of frameworks that talk about this: internal family systems, psychosynthesis, which is what my training was in my dissertation work, Roberto Asciagioli's work. There's a lot of this has been coming around for all the way since the 1960s. People have been talking about selves being more dynamic. And I think we're coming to an attractor point of sorts in as a species, that we're recognizing that assumption that we are one self is not true. My friend Jordan Gruber wrote a beautiful book I highly recommend called Your Symphony of Selves. And it is where he really unpacks the multiplicity of selves in a beautiful way. If any of your listeners are interested in this and really getting a good overview of the many frameworks that have shown this multiplicity over time, I recommend that book. But this awareness that I am, you know, who I am right now talking in this conversation is not the self that is going to be talking to my daughter when I'm making snacks, is not the self that's going to be at the doctor's office, at 3 o'clock today. Right. So we have different parts that are always kind of coming to the fore depending on what the situation is. And so perhaps one thing that would be great as an awareness for your container and in your listeners is that during the dark night, there is an opening of a loosening of the potentiality of selves and parts. And it is a great, I mean, if you happen to find yourself, I'm sorry, because I know how deeply painful it is. And I don't wish it on anyone, but if you happen to find yourself in a dark night presently, wow, what an opportunity you have to look directly at the many selves that are arising up through this, that are, as you said, coming up to be heard, to be touched, to be felt, maybe not even ever spoken of, just witnessed. Wow.
Absolutely. I mean, I remember my first experience of the multiplicity of selves was many years ago. I was in a transpersonal psychology training, and we did an exercise where I met this parade of subpersonalities. And so many of them resonated. Some of them I had no idea what they were. I mean, I remember there was a little orphan boy, and there was a monk, and there was a martyr type woman called downtrodden Deirdre, and I still remember them now. But I think there was something in that moment of revelation, which was many years before the dark night, of just opening up that vista, so that coming into the dark night many years later, there was at least an openness to the movement, the surfacing of various selves. And I think that's only deepened. I think there's something in this to say as well about then how there is a there is a relating back to the whole of the parts. So I don't think that what we're saying simply is like you're just a collection of disparate parts. I think there's a coming back into the knowing ourselves as the whole, but in a whole that doesn't restrict itself to a single sense of self. I love that phrase, the single self assumption, that once the whole knows itself as the multiplicity, it simply doesn't need to do that anymore. And there's a fluidity around the way that this all moves. That doesn't demand this isn't about a sort of dissection into parts. What I've found recently is that much as there's space for parts to emerge still, there was also a while back a really clear sense of the wholeness of this, and just the kind of deliciousness of that. And that isn't to suggest that it feels great to be me all of the time, because that's not what we're talking about. But just that sense of, this can now be all that it is. And I think that one of the many reasons maybe why we have dark nights is that we've been funneled or restricted into being this single self. And we get to the point where we just can't hold all the rest of it at bay. I mean, that all of this starts to break through. Is there anything else that comes to you to say about this multiplicity of selves? Because it feels so important.
Yes, because you're touching exactly it. Imagine if I feel I'm just one self, and then I'm going into a dark night and there's a symbolic death. Well, if I'm just one self, whew, yee, what's dying? Will I come back? Will I be gone forever? But with this kind of orientation of recognizing that, wait, oh, in my multiplicity is wholeness, then maybe there's some selves that need to have a symbolic death that don't are not optimal in my system, in my inner world anymore, in the way that they are currently being met or not met or dealt with or not dealt with. And so having this framework really, when you're going through the dark night, it feels like just such a kind of built-in freedom to allow what needs to die, and what needs to come on board, a new alive collection of selves that might want to be coming forward. To me, that is just wow. I mean, you can see, and my heart gets tender as I say it, because this for both of us is a tender place, but you can see how the suffering in a mind could get so loud in a dark night because there's nowhere to go.
Mm.
There's no room to be any different. And so this bringing this awareness on that there are, we're filled with parts, and there are parts of me that are dying right now, and parts of me that are being born right now. That's the fluidity of the multiplicity of selves. I'm never have been confined to being one way. Never. I've always been free to be any self that wants to come forward. Good. Yes. I've always had that freedom. To me, having the awareness of that freedom is just, it's life-saving information for a lot of folks.
Yes, I mean, certainly in the first, I would say probably at least the first 2 years of my dark night, I didn't think it would be survivable. And I think it was largely because of what you just said, that this single self who, as I said, I'd come across the notion of selves or subpersonalities, but I still took them to be part of this main self. And when that started to break down, it didn't feel like there was anything beyond that. So I think it takes quite a long time to start to learn to trust that what is dying is, as you just said, is that assumed single self, which, God love it, is usually so completely exhausted at having to be that, and desperately, uh, desperately in pain and all of those other things. When we start to get glimpses of something else coming in, then I think there can be more maybe trust, or the notion of oh I'm not just this. that maybe there's something beyond this. So thank you for bringing that in, because I think that's such an important piece, particularly at the beginning of the Dark Night, that sense that we're going into a process, a cycle of dying and living, which is actually what life is. But it's as if we've kind of missed that until we get to the Dark Night, isn't it? I'm reminded of what you said about the accrued snowball of stuff. That prior to the Dark Night, there hadn't been a process of a dropping and a picking up again, or a dying or rebirth, or that kind of cycle. So I think by the time most of us get to that, we're kind of far past the point, right? Which is why I think it's partly it feels so catastrophic, because we're just not attuned to those cycles, ebb and flow, tide coming in and out, living and dying, and so on.
Yeah, I think that's why your work and sharing the good news of the multiplicity of selves, and that, we can survive these dark nights, and that even perhaps are a quite natural part of being the proud owner of a human psyche, and and all the wonders and weirdness that comes with that, and that, and something about me is that I trust our natural instinct for healing. I really do. I've seen it in my own life. That same intelligence that if I cut my arm, that heals that wound, is alive in here, and that if I am attuned with that healing intelligence, that it will happen for me. And I think the multiplicity of selves plays so well into that framework, because it means that the selves that are coming forward, particularly, say, for example, in the Dark Night, like they were coming forward for me, were coming forward for healing. We're coming forward in their own way at shape, right time, for that natural intelligence of healing to start to happen. And as we've keep touching on, it's not forced. It's not something you can choose. It's and it is when those parts come up, and for me, when a part is coming up, there's now a process of recognizing which part is arising in any given moment. This is kind of another level, a layer of the multiplicity of selves, is having a model or framework to recognize which self is arising in any given time. But applied to this in the Dark Night experience, also recognizing if I'm slipping into a dark night, which selves are coming forward for me to tend to. Like, just having an awareness of that is really empowering for any human with any psyche, just to recognize, hey, something's coming up. It's okay. This part that wants to be seen, wants to be. Maybe I'll never say it to anybody else. Maybe it's so embarrassing, so shameful that I'll never say it, but just that I can be within myself and say, "Ooh, I feel you. I hear you. I see you there. Let's just see each other. I don't need to fix you. I just want you to know this part of myself, that I love you and that I see you and that I'm grateful you've been part of my journey." Just that is level 10, 5-star Yelp review healing right there.
I love that. And just to say, I think sometimes when these parts come in, it might not begin like that. There might be something of a standoff at first, and the part comes in and might be like, where the hell have you been? And we then think, oh, whoa, like, what are you doing here? That there's no immediate requirement to be in a particular relationship with this part, or with the parts that come, we kind of find, for me, that the intelligence of that healing includes all of that. So it may be that the intelligence of the healing in any given moment is anger towards the parts, or the parts anger towards us. Or, I mean, it could be a multiplicity again, it could be all sorts of things. Recently, I've been starting to write about that intelligence of healing, and what it is to discern the thread of that, because it has a different feel to it than other things, doesn't it? You know, it has a very different feel to it than some kind of much more intellectual idea about how we should work with ourselves. It moves and speaks, as it were, in very different ways than we're used to. And I think for me, it took a good few years. I think I was well into the dark night and beyond that before I really started to get a sense, A, of the fact that that healing intelligence does move in the ways that you just described, but also to really open myself, or give myself permission to be able to follow it, to be able to follow the threads of it in all the different ways that it moves. Because I think, at the beginning, and I would find myself following it in the dark night just because I would fall into there being no other possibility. But I felt kind of mad doing it, right? There would be a lot of shame around that. I was very clear that I didn't want to be seen in that. Um, Talking of shame, I remember an incident which was in pretty early days of the Dark Night, and there was a huge amount of anguish, and I think what was very early childhood trauma and distress coming up. And what I'd very recently discovered at that time, was that sitting in small dark spaces felt soothing, like there was a real pull to do that. And there was a particular cupboard that I was drawn to. So, I mean, this is something that I would do when everybody else was out of the house, right? I mean, you know, so I'd gone into, I was in this place, all of this stuff coming up, and I'd gone and sat in the cupboard. And on that particular day, and I think it was the only day it happened, there'd also been a prompting, if you like, to take my clothes off. So, that's what felt natural to me in that moment. So there I was sitting in the cupboard. There was lots of sobbing, whatever was coming up was coming up, and I was with it. Came out of the cupboard, got dressed, thought, oh, I'll just go and make a cup of tea. And there was a ring on the doorbell, and it was an estate agent come round to look at the house. And I just, even at the time, I did think that was pretty funny that, given 10 minutes earlier, they would have been showing some people around the house. And so I tell that story really just by way of saying, when we talk about the intelligence of this healing and the way that that moves, it really can move in all sorts of different ways, right? We're not talking about sort of sitting cross-legged on a cushion. Some days that might be how it is, but many, many days it's, face down in front of the trees, or it's in the cupboard, or it might be moving in a particular way, or it's so many things.
I just wanna honor you, that self, that part of you.
Oh, thank you.
Wow, I hold you, hands, hold you, that you follow your healing even when it goes into weird places. Even and especially, it's going to go into weird it's kind of like, when I'm talking about the selves coming to the fore, they don't just come up and be like, "Knock, knock, um, I'm here, I need your attention." it's more like, um, really strange really strange behavior and actions that are coming up and you're like, "Whoa, where did that come from?" Or what's that about?" I remember I have a baby Jenny self. So my second part of the memoir is about infant trauma and rage and my baby Jenny self who arose out of that. And one time my wife and I were having a fight and we were downstairs in our art studio and I was doing some painting and something happened where baby Jenny part was triggered. And I took my hand as hard as I could and I slapped that canvas full of wet paint and paint went everywhere. Now, did I understand that was baby Jenny at that point? Nope. I didn't know, but I knew something that was not normal behavior for me. That was wild, strange, erratic kind of behavior for me, but that's how it was presenting, right? Or you stepping into the cupboard, right? Feeling that is what is so the encouragement here is that if and when the parts come calling in all kinds of strange and beautiful ways, listening to it. I When you were sharing about the cupboard, I just want to share really quickly, because it's in this first memoir. When I was 11 or 12, I was alone a lot. Well, we were latchkey kids, so we spent days and days alone. And I had a walk-in closet, and I tied a bed sheet to all 4 corners in the closet to kind of make a hammock, and I crawled inside that hammock, and in my imagination, it became a hospital where people were
Mm.
coming to visit me,
Oh,
and I would mouth the words, "We miss you at school, Jenny." "Oh, yeah, but I'm here, I'm just, I'm gonna be okay." How beautiful that as a child, we knew I was comforting myself. I was alone, and I was using the power of my imagination to comfort myself in my own closet. That's the flow of intelligence, of healing, and maybe as children, we probably are a little bit more open to it, and, so maybe also, as adults, we should lean into that strangeness. There's a lot of healing there.
such a beautiful example. And yeah, I mean, I think there's so much creativity in us that as adults we've tended to shut down. Or we might allow ourselves sort of prescribed forms of creativity, but not that deeper creativity with ourselves as we just described. So yes, absolutely. I mean, I'm really grateful for what felt like what used to feel like weirdness. It just feels like normal life now. So I think it does move from feeling weird to feeling, yeah, completely normal. I'd I'd love you to come back for another episode because I think we've got so much more to talk about. But I'm just wondering before we wrap up today, for anybody who's right in it just now, what would you like to share? What else would you like to share?
You're not alone. As uncomfortable and maybe even unnatural as it feels, it is probably one of the most natural things that we experience as humans, to come back home to ourselves and to trust the parts of you that are there for you, in you, who have been with you all along as allies as beings that are alive inside of us that greatly care for us. And that sometimes even the dark night is so, an isolating process that you don't want to talk or share anything with another human, but that maybe there are allies within you that can come to the fore and hold your hand, and you can hold their hand or paw or wing or whatever, and find your way back to the beingness of you. I trust that.
So much so. I mean, beautifully put. That is what this is all about, isn't it? Coming back to the beingness of us, becoming more and more immersed in living from our Janness, our Fionaness, our who we are-ness, in ways that, in my experience, just keep on moving. There's a deepening of that. It isn't like we get to somehow there's an end to the process, precisely because it's a natural process and we're in the moving of that now. That will do what it does for as long as we're here. I also just really want to lift up what you just said about these parts that greatly care for us. I think that's often difficult to notice because we might not in the moment necessarily experience those parts as being caring. I'm reminded of a passage in the book where there was a kind of a conversation or a dialogue between one part of me and the critical, I guess, superego part of me, that when I got into that conversation with it, was saying like, oh my God, like it's been such hard work trying to sort you out all of the time. The only way I could do it was by, doing what I do. And I think we can't know ahead of time when those relationships are going to reveal themselves as caring. But trust us that at some point they will. So this isn't about saying, and I know this is often what happens, that the critical parts of us will hear certain things and say, yeah, but I don't do that, or that isn't, at some point, if you're in the movement of this, if you're in the dark night, that will start to change, and often in completely unexpected ways.
And I think it's so well said, Fiona, and I think the reason for it, the reason it will ultimately arrive at a place of love is because these parts are born out of protection, out of care, out of survival. They're even if they become wild and wonky and, eccentric and maybe even harmful. Yes, harmful parts. Even that was born out of a great love. That's how beautiful we are inside.
Yes, I'm so glad we've come back to Ruth. You know, yes, absolutely. These parts that were born out of love and protection can become all sorts of sort of twisted out growths, can't they? And do weird things because they've been obscured and for all sorts of other reasons. Absolutely, coming back to see, to be reunited with their realness,
Right.
I think is so profound, to be able to have that relationship with them in all the different ways that we do.
And not a fixing orientation. Ruth wouldn't even come to me and tell me her name until I stopped trying to fix myself.
Oh, I mean, it feels like there's so much in there. I'd love to carry that forward
Good.
because because
Yeah.
that, I think there is many somethings in us, in my experience, that have just been waiting for us to get the fuck out of the way, basically.
Yeah.
You know, when you stop this tinkering, fiddling about whatever you're doing, then it'll be, this sense that it hasn't, until it's safe really for them to come forward, they don't.
They'll just continue splattering paint all over the place and really doing really
Yes.
wild and wacky things because, the energy always finds a way out. That's a truth about, us and our minds and our energy beings that, that energy will find a way out.
Yeah.
So, that's a good place for us to start in the next conversation.
Jen, thank you so much. It's been an absolute delight, and see you soon.
See you soon.